Well, aside from the general fighting on the front line, it seems from what we heard and what we deduced from where the sound seemed to be coming from, that there was also an attempt to strike the power station that is to the east of Kramatorsk around about 8 or 9 p.m. last night. Apparently unsuccessfully, because today we do have electricity. And so if they'd managed to cut the power, normally it would be, several hours that they wouldn't be able to supply power to the city. We haven't had a power cut today in Kramatorsk. I do think most of these attacks overnight, well, we don't actually have that much detail coming from what the Ukrainians are saying, and not from the energy company either, about whether there was damage to infrastructure in other regions. What we also constantly hear in Kramatorsk is the sound of the fighting on the front line. Today, the artillery and drones are particularly active because it's a very clear, sunny day, though that also makes it harder for Russian infantry to advance because they're more visible. So there are pluses and minuses to the evolution of the weather situation, but it's a little bit eerie. Here I am in this flat, which is very well soundproofed, and we only hear the loudest explosions. But when you step outside into the courtyard, you can hear them almost constantly, far away in the distance, but the sort of thud of fighting going on, very different from the last time I was here, which was in October. And I guess that's simply because the front line has moved closer.
On Friday, Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukraine was definitely not losing the war. Gulliver, I'm wondering how the people feel where you are, especially after witnessing these latest attacks.
Well, most people don't say that they think Ukraine is losing the war, that's for sure. But there are people who stayed here in Kramatorsk and neighboring Slavyansk, thinking that it would be okay here, determined not to leave their homes, who are now starting to leave. Yesterday, we were at the main transit center or reception point for people who've been evacuated from frontline areas, whether they've been evacuated by volunteers who come and get them in minibuses or come under their own steam. There's a sort of reception point where they can register for different kinds of aid. Lots of Ukrainian and international NGOs are present, and really they've got an impressive coordinated effort. What they told us is that they are seeing more and more people coming, and more people coming from Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, cities that are that much further from the front line and that were until recently considered relatively safe. But what's happened now is that these cities have come within range of Russian first-person view drones, these little drones that can, and sometimes have in some cases, just picked out random civilians on the streets. Certainly we've seen that happening in the southern city of Kherson, and I think there's fear here that that could happen here too, and it's prompting people who've been very keen not to leave to decide that actually they better had.
Gulliver, real quickly, in western Ukraine, in Lviv, there were several explosive devices that were reported to have been detonated around midnight. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, this seems to have been a deliberate attack, and the authorities say that 25 people have been injured as a result. It was in the city centre, the historic centre of Lviv, and one policeman killed. The local authorities in Lviv region say they've arrested somewhere in the region a suspect connected with this attack. We don't know much more about it now, except there have been similar instances of where the Russians have, and sometimes just by proposing money and not explaining what the purpose of it is, recruited Ukrainian citizens to carry out these kinds of attacks. There is a precedent for it, but this might be the most serious one yet.
All right, Gulliver, thank you very much. Gulliver Cragg reporting from Kramatorsk.